The fleet appeared without warning. It wasn't the thunderous explosion of warships entering the atmosphere that set Earth's heart racing. No, it was the silence. A vast, unblinking fleet, stretching across the heavens like a living shadow, hanging in orbit above Earth. At first, there were only flashes of light, faint enough to be dismissed as stars, until they multiplied, dozens, hundreds of them, emerging from the black void like dark stars themselves. In moments, the sky grew heavy, as though 1,000 unseen eyes were watching. Captain Elias Drake stood at the command center of Earth's primary military base, his eyes locked on the massive display screen. His jaw tightened, a sharp pain threading through his neck as he tried to steady his breath. Behind him, the command center buzzed with activity, a chorus of anxious voices filling the room. "I can't believe this. It's happening," muttered Lieutenant Alana Ramirez, her fingers moving over the console in front of her, trying to triangulate the incoming ship's position. Elias didn't turn around to respond. He didn't need to. The reality of the situation was clear. They were not here for diplomacy. The fleet's formation was too deliberate, too perfect. This was not an exploratory mission. This was something far more dangerous. "Sir," Alana continued, her voice tight, "we've identified a fleet of at least 30 ships. They're enormous. Each one is, well, it's like nothing we've ever seen." Elias nodded grimly. Their sensors had confirmed the data. Each ship was the size of a city, bristling with weaponry that could level entire nations with ease. They were here. And humanity, with its fractured military and outdated defenses, was utterly outmatched. "Status report," Elias commanded, his voice low but firm, carrying the weight of authority. "Evacuation is underway, Captain," reported Commander Hartley, his face flickering on the screen in front of Elias. "But we're out of time. We can't even get a full defensive perimeter in place before they're in range." Elias stood still, his mind racing. He could almost feel the weight of history bearing down on him, the lives of billions hanging in the balance. Yet, something gnawed at him, a creeping sense of unease, something more than the obvious danger. "They're waiting," Elias muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Alana glanced up at him, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "They're not attacking," Elias said slowly. "Not yet. It's like they're waiting for something." Before Alana could respond, the screens in the command center flickered. The alien ships, whose movements had been a calculated but ominous stillness, began to shift, slowly at first, then with undeniable purpose. One by one, a thin, blue beam of light shot out from the largest ship, converging directly onto Earth's capital. For a moment, the entire world held its breath. Then, the message came through. The voice that filled the room was not booming or menacing, but rather calm, too calm. The words were accompanied by a visual of an alien figure, tall and regal, with elongated limbs and skin that seemed to ripple like water. His eyes, glowing with an eerie light, focused directly on the cameras. "We have come, Earth," the figure said, his voice clear and methodical. "To test you." The silence that followed was deafening. Elias felt his heart skip a beat, his pulse quickening. He exchanged a glance with Alana. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words died in her throat. The alien continued, "Send one ship of your people to us, a single representative. Pass our test, and you will earn your place among the stars. Fail, and you will face extinction." The message cut out abruptly, leaving the hum of the room to fill the vacuum of space. For a long moment, Elias couldn't move. His mind raced, torn between disbelief and a cold, hard logic that told him this wasn't a simple demand. This was a challenge, an opportunity for survival. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him, waiting for his response. The situation was clear: Earth was at the mercy of these alien beings. The fleet's mere presence had rendered their weapons useless. This test was their only hope, but one ship, one chance. The odds were unimaginable. "They want a representative ship," Elias murmured, shaking his head. "They think we're just a test subject. That's what this is. A test." Commander Hartley's voice broke through the silence. "Who do we send, sir?" Who can possibly represent us? Elias's gaze hardened. For a moment, he thought of the scores of seasoned generals and officers under his command. But his mind was already made up. I'll go. Alana's sharp intake of breath cut through the tension. She stepped forward, her voice unwavering. Captain, you can't. No, Elias interrupted, his voice low but resolute. I'm the one they want. I know the stakes. I know what this is about. Alana's eyes filled with a mixture of concern and disbelief, but she nodded. She didn't question him further. She knew better. Elias was a veteran of countless skirmishes. But this was different. This was no ordinary mission. This was humanity's last stand. Elias stood at the airstrip, his boots crunching against the concrete as the Eagle's Wrath loomed ahead of him, a hulking metal beast that was far too small for the task ahead. The ship had been a rushed prototype, built in less than a year, outfitted with the latest human technology, but still a far cry from the warships hanging in orbit above them. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was a token gesture, a single ship sent to the slaughter. You're sure about this? Alana's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood beside him, her brow furrowed as she looked up at the vessel. Her uniform was immaculate, though there was no hiding the tightness in her shoulders. Elias nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the sleek black hull of the ship. It seemed almost fragile in comparison to the towering alien vessels above them. It's not about what we've got. It's about what we do with it. But this? She gestured at the ship. It's a test. If you fail. I know the stakes, Lieutenant, Elias interrupted, his voice hardening. He turned to face her, the weight of their mission bearing down on him. I don't have time for second guesses. We either pass or we die. Alana's lips pressed together, a sign of frustration more than disagreement. You don't even know what the test is, Captain. They didn't tell us anything. How do you fight something you don't understand? Elias didn't have an answer. He only stared at the ship, its engines dark, its sleek form deceptively quiet. They had no choice but to go. One ship, one chance, and the survival of their world hung in the balance. We'll find out soon enough, he said, his tone grim. A muffled voice crackled over the comms. Captain, the Eagle's Wrath is ready for launch. Without a word, Elias turned and strode towards the ramp. Alana followed, her steps quick, determined. Inside, the Eagle's Wrath was sterile, almost cold, metal walls and flickering lights, a far cry from the polished control rooms of Earth's military headquarters. The small bridge, surrounded by panels and holographic displays, hummed with quiet activity. Elias settled into the captain's seat, eyes scanning the controls before him. His hands moved instinctively, flicking switches and adjusting dials. The cockpit was familiar, but the gravity of the situation made the space feel claustrophobic. Alana slid into the seat next to him, glancing at the readouts. We're cleared for launch, Captain. But, what now? Now, we fly, Elias said. His voice was steady, but his mind churned with questions. The aliens hadn't explained the test in detail, only that they would be judged on their ability to prove themselves. But what did that mean? Military tactics? Strategy? Diplomacy? He couldn't begin to fathom the nature of the challenge they were about to face. The ship's engines thrummed to life, and the world outside the cockpit window blurred as the Eagle's Wrath shot into the sky. The familiar sight of Earth's atmosphere stretched out before them, but Elias barely registered it. His focus was entirely on the mission. You're looking a little pale there, Captain, Alana said softly, her voice a slight tease that didn't quite reach her eyes. Elias met her gaze for a moment before turning back to the controls. We're not the ones who should be worried. For the next few hours, the journey was uneventful, save for the rising tension between them. As they moved further into space, the stars around them grew colder, the vastness of the universe pressing down on them like an invisible weight. The cockpit was silent save for the occasional murmur from the ship's AI, Astra, guiding them along the predetermined course. But despite the quiet, Elias could feel Alana's eyes on him. He could feel the weight of her unspoken questions, the concern hidden beneath her stoic exterior. She had always trusted him, no one else had been willing to take this mission, but now he could sense her doubt. "Don't worry," he said after a long pause, not looking at her. "We're human. We'll figure it out." "I hope you're right," Alana replied. "Because the way things are going, I don't think we've got a chance in hell." Elias glanced at her sharply, the sharpness of her words cutting through the air between them. "What do you mean?" Her eyes flashed with something, frustration, fear, maybe both, but her voice remained steady. "They've got more firepower than we could even dream of. They've got technology centuries ahead of us. And we're going to prove we're worth saving?" Elias tightened his grip on the controls. "We're going to survive, Lieutenant. That's all we can do right now. The rest will take care of itself." The ship continued its journey into the cold void of space, the silence hanging between them like a shroud. Then, a new voice crackled over the comms, Astra, the ship's AI. "Captain, we are entering the alien fleet's designated space. Sensors detecting large energy signatures ahead. Prepare for potential hostilities." Elias's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The unknown test. They were about to face whatever the aliens had in store. Alana's fingers tensed on the console. "Whatever happens, Captain." "I know," Elias said, his voice tight. He inhaled deeply, trying to steady his nerves. This wasn't about the odds or the weapons, they would win or fail based on their ability to think, to adapt, to survive. A deep rumble echoed through the ship. Outside the window, a fleet of massive ships materialized from the darkness, their forms blocking out the stars. It was clear, this was no longer a mission. It was a trial. And it was about to begin. The stars outside the ship's cockpit were swallowed by the colossal shadows of the alien fleet. The Eagle's wrath was nothing more than a speck in the void, dwarfed by the sprawling ships that hung like predators in orbit. Elias tightened his grip on the controls, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But he couldn't, he wouldn't. The fate of Earth, his people, depended on the choices he made in the next few moments. "We're in position, Captain." Alana's voice was tight, but resolute. Her eyes never left the screens, where dozens of alien ships flickered like ominous stars. "Ready for whatever this test is." Elias didn't respond right away. He could feel the weight of her words, the uncertainty in her tone was unmistakable. But there was no time for hesitation. If they were going to survive, they had to play the part, even if they had no idea what the test was. "Astra, status report," he barked, the urgency in his voice betraying his calm demeanor. The ship's AI voice was eerily calm. "Sensors detecting fluctuations in the atmosphere around the flagship. Energy levels are rising. Suggest preparing for possible engagement." Elias nodded. "Understood. Stay alert, everyone." Alana's hand hovered above the weapons console, her fingers twitching as if willing herself to press the button. It wasn't fear that held her back, it was the same thing that held Elias in place, the knowledge that firing would mean an immediate response, a battle they couldn't win. Not against these ships, with their unimaginable firepower. "We're not attacking." "Not yet," Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. Alana glanced at him, her eyes sharp. "You really think they'll play fair? After all this?" "I don't know. But we're going to find out." He pressed a few buttons on his console, the ship's systems coming to life with a soft whir. The ship was small, but it was fast, agile. And if anything, that gave them an edge. The massive alien flagship, its surface sleek and black, as though it swallowed the light around it, seemed to pulse with energy, a living, breathing entity in the depths of space. A high-pitched tone hummed through the ship's comms, signaling that something was happening. A figure appeared on the central screen. Its shape was humanoid, but its body seemed to flicker, its features shifting as though it wasn't quite made of flesh. "Human," the alien's voice cracked through the ship's comm system. It wasn't quite a voice, more a resonance, a sound that reverberated in Elias's bones. "You have come." Elias's muscles tensed, his heart racing. His fingers hovered over the controls, ready to act if things went sideways. But he didn't interrupt. "You wish to prove yourselves," the alien continued. Its form blurred and shimmered again. "Very well. You will face a trial. Succeed, and you may join the stars. Fail, and your species will be extinguished." A flicker of dread crept into Elias's mind, but he held it back. "What is the trial?" he asked, his voice firm. The alien didn't respond immediately. Instead, the screen flickered, showing images of the ship, its size, its weaponry, its maneuverability. The ship's AI readout showed the same data, but Elias couldn't afford to be distracted by the numbers. "You will face a single challenge," the alien's voice resumed, now clearer, more distinct. "A trial of intellect and will. Your ship will enter the maze." Suddenly, the stars around them began to shift. A glowing net of light appeared in the blackness, pulsing and shimmering like a vast web. From nowhere, strange geometric shapes materialized, structures that seemed to bend reality itself. There was no clear path, no visible way forward, just this labyrinth, vast and alive. It was a trap. A test. And it wasn't just about their ship's capabilities. "It's a maze," Alana murmured, her voice tinged with disbelief. "How are we supposed to?" Before she could finish, a series of flashing lights erupted in front of the ship. The labyrinth was closing in, the walls of light drawing closer, more insistent. One wrong move, and they would be crushed. "Brace for evasive maneuvers," Elias barked, slamming his hands on the control panel. The ship lurched forward, a sudden burst of acceleration as the Eagle's Wrath shot into the maze, dodging walls of light that flared to life in front of them. The ship's hull groaned as it whined and bucked under the strain, but Elias kept his focus, his eyes darting from one screen to the next, calculating the ship's next move. They had to think fast, each turn an unpredictable twist in a maze that seemed to change as they moved through it. Every corner was a gamble, every decision critical. Alana's voice was calm but tight. "The walls are closing in, Captain. We need to get out of here, or—" "I know," Elias snapped. His hands danced over the controls, his mind running calculations faster than he had ever thought possible. "Keep steady, Alana. Don't let fear guide you. Focus." The ship swerved narrowly around a sudden wall of light, narrowly avoiding it as it shot past. But more walls appeared in their path, flashing to life like the jaws of a great beast closing in. There was no time to think about escape. There was only the next move. The ship hurtled forward, its engines roaring as it made sharp turns and wild accelerations, navigating a maze of impossible geometry. A near miss here, a flash of light there. Sweat clung to Elias's brow, but he didn't falter. Every part of him was aware, every muscle straining, every sense heightened to the task. "You're doing well," Alana said softly. It was an acknowledgement, a hint of hope in her voice, even as they pushed deeper into the maze. But Elias didn't respond. He couldn't afford to. The trial was far from over, and they were far from safe. The walls of light surged again, closing in tighter. They were running out of time. Elias' breath came in shallow gasps as the Eagle's Wrath tore through the labyrinth, the ship's hull vibrating with each violent turn. The walls of light flared around them, twisting in patterns too erratic to predict. Alana's voice was the only steady thing in the chaos, a constant thread of calm in the storm. "Left," she shouted, her fingers already moving over the weapons console, tracking the near-constant barrage of energy pulses flying past their ship. "No, right." Elias corrected, his mind calculating the quickest escape route as he slammed the control stick to the right. The ship banked hard, narrowly avoiding a shimmering wall of light that surged like a tidal wave. His pulse hammered in his ears, but he had no time to think about fear. They had one shot at this. The walls were closing in faster now. No longer just glowing barriers, the maze had become a battlefield, with strange alien projectiles firing from hidden turrets embedded in the labyrinth's shifting structures. The ship's shields flared as a blast hit them, sending a shudder through the vessel. "We can't keep this up forever, Captain," Alana said, her voice tight. "The shields won't hold if we keep taking hits." "I know," Elias muttered. He adjusted their speed, the engines roaring as he pushed them harder. But every twist, every turn, only revealed more barriers, more weapons designed to stop them. They were running out of options. "What do we do?" Alana asked, her voice just above a whisper. The desperation beneath her calm facade cut through Elias like a blade. His gaze flicked to the holographic map in front of him. The maze was a living entity, shifting and rearranging, making any escape seem impossible. The walls of light were multiplying, closing in from all sides, until the space around them felt suffocating. "Stay focused," Elias said, clenching his jaw. "Keep your head in the game. We're not losing this." Another volley of energy pulses tore past them, grazing the side of the ship. The lights dimmed briefly as the shields flickered. Elias' heart skipped a beat, but he pushed the panic back down. The maze was almost over. They were almost there. Captain Astra, the ship's AI, chimed in, cutting through the tension in the cockpit. Energy reading detected ahead. Strong pulse. Before Elias could react, the ship's sensors flared with a violent explosion of light. The maze's core was just ahead, a swirling vortex of energy, a pulse so powerful it rippled through space itself. It was the heart of the trial, and they had no choice but to go through it. The alien fleet had constructed it to test their endurance, their ability to adapt. "No way around it," Elias muttered under his breath. He set their trajectory, locking them on course. "Hold tight, Alana. It's going to get rough." The ship plunged into the energy pulse, and the world outside turned to pure, blinding light. The Eagle's Wrath shuddered violently as they passed through the energy barrier. Every system screamed in warning. The heat was unbearable, the sheer force of the pulse threatening to rip them apart at the seams. "Shields are down to 15%. Alana yelled, her eyes wide. "We need to break through." But the walls were collapsing in on them. No escape. The pulse was consuming everything. It was either break through or be torn apart. Elias slammed his hands on the control panel, the ship's engines roaring as they fought to stay intact, tearing through the pulse with all the power the ship could muster. "I'm not going to let them die," Elias growled, his voice low, determined. He could feel the strain on the ship, every nerve of the vessel being pushed beyond its limits. But it was nothing compared to what humans had endured, what he had endured. The thought sharpened his resolve. "Come on." Alana's voice was a whip crack of urgency, her hands flying over the console, adding her will to the ship's fragile, strained systems. The pulse reached its crescendo, a crashing wave of energy, and for a moment, Elias thought they were done. The ship groaned under the pressure, the hull bending, engines faltering. Then, like a ship slicing through a storm, the light parted. The Eagle's Wrath shot forward, its engines roaring as they escaped the core of the pulse. The maze was behind them. The trial was over. Elias slumped back in his seat, sweat dripping from his brow, his pulse hammering in his chest. The ship was battered, the systems were damaged, but they were alive. "Status?" he asked, his voice rough. "The maze is closed," Astra reported. "We've made it through the trial." The cockpit was silent for a heartbeat. Then, Alana's voice cut through the tension, softer now, but filled with disbelief. "We did it. We actually did it." Elias didn't reply immediately. His mind was still processing what had just happened. What they had just survived. A sudden weight pressed down on him. They hadn't just survived a test. They'd proven themselves. And now, they were ready for whatever came next. "I think," Elias said, his voice steady, "we've earned their respect." The holographic image of the alien flagship flickered back onto the screen. The same strange, shimmering figure appeared before them. Its form shimmered with an otherworldly energy as it spoke, its voice calm and almost respectful. "You have passed," it intoned. "You are worthy." Elias stood, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "Then we're ready for the next challenge." The alien paused, And for a brief moment, Elias saw something in the figure's flickering eyes, a hint of admiration, perhaps. You may now proceed. The path to the stars is open to you, human. And with that, they were no longer just survivors. They were a force to be reckoned with.